Excellent. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Meg Alexander. I am a virtual host and moderator with PowerToFly. I was part of the PowerToFly community. I joined in 2014 as a job seeker and landed my first remote role with PowerToFly in 2019. And I've done a lot of different things in my past roles and past lives, including, I worked in manufacturing. I was in audiobook publishing. I was a paralegal for a number of years. So thank you. I'm just so grateful to, kind of have this great platform with PowerToFly, but also to, speak to our community and let you know, like, you can absolutely find a great opportunity through PowerToFly, and you can come at it from any direction. It doesn't have to be, a straight shot from A to B. So thank you to all of you who are joining us today. All right, so I was really inspired by a lot of your story. So can we, for the people that maybe aren't familiar with time study, can you talk to us a little bit about why you decided to create time study and what the company's mission is?
Sure. So time study, we launched time study in 2017. So you can think of that as our MVP phase. You may hear a lot about the prototype. So it was actually launched because it spent a lot of years building software, primarily for hospitals and research organizations around the world. And I saw this pattern of these organizations creating these third-party solutions to collect data, and a lot of it was related to how people spent their time. But it depended on who asked the question. So if the finance department was asking, they would have a different system to reflect how you spend your time. And if the medical affairs department is asking, it's in another system. And so I just saw an opportunity to create a central platform that allows these organizations to understand how time is spent. But more importantly, our solution is designed to elevate opportunities to spend time top of license. And top of license is the time that you spend in your highest skill. It's the time that you spend in the area that you were skilled in and that you want to spend time in. And so in hospitals, for physicians, that's time that they actually spend with patients. So when we launched the company, the first thing we learned when we collected quite a bit of data, we had like millions of rows of data on how people spend their time at work. And we learned that clinical practitioners spend about 30% of their time actually serving patients. And so we decided to create a platform to elevate that story and to uncover why that's happening. And we also learned that when people spend time top of license, they're happier. The people that they serve are happier. They do better work, and the organization actually makes more money. So that's time study.
I love that. It's such a really great, interesting thing to look at. You're right. I mean, like, that 30% number is crazy that if you're a practitioner and you're a care provider, but you're only spending 30% doing that thing that you really trained for. Especially,
I think that resonates with a lot of people. I think a lot
right?
of people feel like they don't spend time in their highest area of, skill or gift or passion.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much admin work to be done. There's all of the stuff that kind of exists in the background, but it's not always done by admins. Having come from a paralegal background and being, in a position where I had to, track my time down to the 10th of an hour, it was kind of wild for me to, start doing that and really understand both kind of how quickly 10 minutes can go by and how long tasks actually take. And you're right. I mean, it's a great thing to think about because so many industries, you don't have to do that. So it's really easy to lose track of where you're actually spending your time.
Yeah. It's fascinating work because there are tons of time tracking systems in the world. We've all encountered a timesheet system, and timesheets were created in the 1950s, I think, in the legal sector, and it was to track billable time. And so not a lot has changed since then. It doesn't tell a full story of how people are spending their time at work. It also doesn't tell a complete story of why people spend their time the way that they do. And a lot of it are these patterns of regulations and requirements that create overhead for people. And at some point, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. We reach a point where a physician spends 30% of their time actually with patients. So that's the work. We're really excited about the work from the human standpoint of the work, but also as a data nerd, there's a lot of automations and machine learning and stuff. So that's fun as well.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You talked about how you all gather data. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that data gathering happens, especially when it comes to areas about, like improving efficiency? How does that work?
Sure. So it's a combination of meeting people where they are. So there's still some self-reported aspects, which some data, it doesn't exist in the enterprise. And so, for example, a person may spend some time in a meeting outside of the organization for a reason that may not be reflected anywhere. So we have a self-reported aspect of our platform. It's a web-based platform, and it has a mobile app as well. Then we couple that with the data that already exists, both structured and unstructured. And by unstructured, I mean like data like audio, like dictation notes, for example, things like that. We take that information as well as billing data, health record information, and we're able to supplement a person's recall of how they spent their time with what the data says. And then finally, the person gets to decide what the story is. So they have to sign off on that story. They take a look at what the machine thinks they're spending their time doing, and then they correct it or add to that story and submit it. And so it really works that way. People can enter or look at the time gathered on them from a mobile application or from a website. And we're officially in market in 2018. We're already in almost 40 hospitals in the United States.
That's great. So I love the idea of kind of the idea that the person has the final say on it, because you're right, like, these things can so many times be wrong or be misinterpreted. And I love what you're talking about like kind of working with a framework and then like doing a double check on it. There's plenty of times where even outside of my paralegal lifetime, a million years ago, there's times where I would, kind of keep a rough outline of like what I was doing during the day. And when I went back to it, I would think, yeah, like I really got a lot done, or I'd be able to add things to it and be like, oh no, don't forget, like, between this meeting and that meeting, I worked on 3 different reports or whatever. Exactly. So I love that idea of kind of like encouraging the recall based on just what you can come up with to help supplement the data.
Yeah.
So how does that really play into employee efficiency? Because like you said, there's, the way we spend our time can vary based on so many different, there are so many different factors. But how does the data gathering really help with the efficiency? Like, do you look at, where the inefficiencies come in, or, how does that work?
Yeah. So we have, of course, every person has a user profile. So from a healthcare perspective, we know like the specialty of the clinician, their department, and other people they work with, et cetera. We take that information and it helps us make sense of the activities that are in their time profile. That actually allows us to see patterns, so we can know which activities are overhead, and we can predict a pattern of more overhead and less top of license time. And the way that it helps with efficiency is it's a stakeholder, a manager, a team lead can see that in real time and can make an adjustment. So for example, perhaps there are some inefficiencies in how patients are admitted to beds in the hospital. They may see that the physician is more involved than they need be, and they could put another resource in place. So the computer, the machine gives you the data. It's up to the people to decide and act on that data. And so what our software program does is it elevates the insights that actually matter. And so our stakeholders have been great at seeing what data is actually meaningful to making those changes in operational efficiency. In addition to that, there are some automations that help employee efficiency. So I mentioned, a lot of times people are reporting like the same thing in 3 or 4 different places across the enterprise. We centralize a lot of information so that isn't happening. And we have a central notification system, so they're not getting alerted by 6 or 7 different machines and people on the same thing. And so some of that centralization of business rules also helps with efficiency.
I love that. Thank you so much for kind of explaining that. And you're right, it's so easy when you kind of are faced with like the idea of you can gather all this data and that's great, but if you can't parse it down to what actually matters, or you can't, kind of organize the data or make it readable and usable, yep, it's just more noise, right?
More noise. And then another thing that's really interesting, particularly with software, a lot of times people measure like engagement statistics with like technology apps. And we get the question a lot about how long do people spend in our platform. And traditionally, it's been seen as a metric that tells you that someone is really engaged in what you're doing. For us, we actually like that number to go down, because what we don't want to do is to release a technology product that actually adds to the overhead. We're trying to reduce overhead. So efficiency is something that's really central to the company, and also elevating that top of license time. So we're one of the things we don't want is people like hanging out in our platform, unless they just got, doing some data crunching or custom reports, that's fine. But just filling out forms, that's something that we're trying to eliminate.
That's so interesting. I feel like so much of the time when you're developing a product, not necessarily all the time, but so much of the time it's kind of like eyes on the screen, right? You want to extend that time that people use your product and make it more facile and more applicable to various parts of their life. But I love that idea of kind of finding that sweet spot of like, here's where this is useful, but we don't want you to make a new time suck.
We become overhead at that point. And a lot of companies don't really think about that. Like, how does your platform actually impact the person's life? Do we really want our customers like tethered to screens all day? And why? Why would that be?
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so based on the insights and the data that Time Study has gathered, do the people that use your product or use your software experience a reduction in time theft? Because I know like that was a really big, like when I was a paralegal, it wasn't really time theft, it was more about billing. But I know that time theft can be a huge issue because people can kind of be guilty of it without really realizing it.
Got it. Yeah, I think certainly having supplemental data sets can uncover like inconsistencies in how time is reported. What's important is, we have a business rules engine, and that includes definitions in terms of what things mean. And sometimes it means something different depending on who you ask. And so that's something we've been very intentional about, because if you know what things really mean, you can actually compare what's reported to where you have this data represented in other systems. And that can uncover, I would call that inconsistencies in how time is reported. But a lot of that is dependent on the lens. It depends on who's looking at the time. So from the standpoint of the person that's reporting, it could be completely their misunderstanding in terms of how to report their time. It could be that they have a different definition of what that activity means. Or it could be that they're literally trying to steal time. You never know. But if you have enough data and you have the context that you need to evaluate the data, then having supplemental data sources actually does help validate that information. So what we've seen is more accuracy in reporting because of the supplemental data set. And often it's because we are facilitating recall. Recall is largely inaccurate. It's 40% inaccurate. So how long you think you spent on an activity is probably wrong. You probably spent either longer or much shorter. So having a supplemental data set actually enables you to recall better.
Yeah, I can completely agree with that. It's very, absent the idea or absent any kind of pattern of trying to track these things, it's incredibly hard to estimate, not only on the front end, but also on the back end, like how much time something will take you versus how much time you actually spent on it.
Got it. And there's a lot of lead up time that people don't count. It all balances out at some point, but there's prep time, there's commute time, there's a lot of, we all have the same 24 hours in a day, but everyone has their own way of reporting how long they spent on an activity. And for some people, they may use the prep time, the commute time, the research time. Other people may actually interpret that as the time that I spent sitting in the meeting. So having these supplemental data sources and more definitions of what things mean help us to increase accuracy.
Yeah, I think that's so great and very important, a very important facet of this.
Yeah.
I just want to call out, we have about 15 minutes left in today's chat. These always go incredibly fast. So if you have a question that you would like to ask Kishau, or a question that you would like to pose, please feel free to put that into the chat. It's on the right-hand side of your screen. And we've got PowerToFly employees that will be checking that out and reading those questions to us. So please feel free to submit your questions or comments if you have them. Okay, so we've so far focused on the healthcare industry because that's the current focus for timing or time studying, I'm sorry. What industry are you hoping to disrupt next, and why is that, where you think the business should or could go?
Yeah, we have a few things on our radar. A lot of it is in the enterprise sector for us as a company because complexity is where the company's sweet spot is. So the thing that we do really well is to make sense of a lot of complicated regulations and rules and requirements for reporting and collecting this information. So we're looking, and so the research space is big, sales sectors, any corporate area where there's regulations for reporting and collecting this information, compliance aspects, a lot of people, and mobility, employees that are moving around a lot. And so any of those sectors would apply. What we're doing currently is just learning. So as we learn more about those sectors and how they are similar and different from the healthcare sector, it'll be clear which sector we go into next. But for now, we're locked into healthcare because it has a lot of interesting use cases for this data, as well as a lot of interesting use cases from a machine learning aspect and employee mobility. And they also have a ton of data.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
And
just
legal,
so.
I forgot to mention legal. That's a sector. We're contacted a lot from the legal sector about using this. They still haven't figured out the billable hour thing.
Well, it's just so, I love the idea of, and it makes sense why you start with healthcare, because it's something that occurs across the country, and relatively speaking, it's a somewhat standardized, right? You have, kind of the overall process is generally the same from hospital to hospital. But you're right, legal would present so much more of a challenge, just because even, not all family law practices look alike, and not all entertainment law practices look alike. Then you've got sole practitioners. So I can understand that would be a lot of moving pieces to try and tackle.
Yeah, it's actually pretty exciting. That's where I shine, is complexity. So we actually look forward to it.
I love that.
Yeah.
From a personal standpoint, just a personal question from me, have you always really loved living in that complex, busy, lots of plates spinning kind of world?
Yeah. I love the moving pieces, like a lot of moving pieces moving in different directions and trying to figure out how to make that work. That's our challenge, is how do we make, like, we have finance departments and this department and that division and this system and these regulators, and they all want something different. They all have a different intention. They all have different measures of success, and they all have different needs for collecting the data. And can you centralize this into one system so that it makes sense and can service all of those people? That's the challenge. So far, we're doing a pretty good job of doing that, but it is a challenge to be able to navigate so much complexity. And it also changes over time. So you have to be.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's so great. I don't think I would ever describe myself as being good at pulling order or making order from chaos.
From chaos, yeah.
I find that very, very impressive, because it's just not something I have a gift for.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Did you always know that you wanted to do something like this? Not necessarily the particulars, but you wanted to, you saw all of the complexities and the inefficiencies, and you wanted to do something about that? Or was there maybe a different angle that you took kind of towards this?
Yeah, I think so. From the standpoint, like, a person once told me that the thing that you are probably the best at is the thing that frustrates you the most. And I'm the kind of person that notices broken systems. Like, even if I'm in the grocery store, like, I'm noticing if the lines aren't set up correctly and there's some bottleneck. So I've always been that kind of person. It bothers me to no end. And I knew that technology is a good tool for solving some of those problems. So that's how I ended up in this space. But I would say yes, but not, specifically time study, but definitely a person that I won't say enjoy, but that is good at helping people fix broken systems.
I love that idea. Based on the theory that what frustrates you the most is what you're most passionate about. Yeah. I must be passionate about a very lot of things. So that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit more about kind of the demographics at play, right? Have you seen a substantial growth in the number of Black women in STEM areas or STEM fields over the time that you have been in the industry?
Yeah, definitely. I've been in the industry I guess it's almost 25 years now, so it's been a while. When I was studying computer science, I was the only Black woman in the program. And I think I was one of maybe 2 women in the computer science program. There were not very many of us at all. Today, in the same program, I'm actually on their industry advisory board. I see many more women in computer science. I see many women studying IT careers. And there's certainly a ton of people innovating and developing great products that didn't even go to college. And that's great. That's fantastic. So I think that there are a lot more programs and services and a lot more opportunity and access to get in the field. So because of that, yes, I see more people. The thing that I don't see is a lot of focus on retaining those people in technology, but I definitely see more women in STEM fields, certainly since I started my career in STEM.
I'm curious about the retaining aspect. Do you think that's because people kind of dip their feet in and then move on, especially Black women, or do you think that it's maybe more indicative of another issue or another cause?
I think it can be both. Certainly people have like the choice and, the agency to decide what they want to do for a living. But sometimes people recruit people into tech because that's the right thing to do, not necessarily because they want them to be included. And that is when things become a problem, when you start hiring people and they cannot add value because you don't allow them to add value, or they feel excluded in some way, and sometimes that can drive people away from careers in STEM if they feel that there's no pathway for promotion, that there's no opportunity for them to lead, or there's lack of support. And so I could keep going. There's a lot of things there. Then there are also certainly interests, but I don't, a lot of times people talk about a pipeline issue in tech, that there are not enough women or Black women available to hire. I don't believe that. I actually think that there are tons of people that can add value in the space. I think that the way we hire people in tech has to change, and some of the assumptions that we make about what people should know or don't know, and where they should study or don't study, or where they live and don't live. I think so. A lot of that has to change. And I think people have to be willing and excited about having diversity on their teams. If they are not, and they treat it as a chore or a thing that keeps them out of the news, the people that you hire actually pick up on the energy of not feeling a part of the group. And so that's what I'm referring to when I talk about retention. I think I see a lot of people in STEM careers working for employers, and they may go out on their own because they just feel that they could do more on their own, that they could grow more. And so I do understand that.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir on so much of what you're saying, because this is something that at PowerToFly we see a lot, right? You see companies that don't understand why they can't keep these people that they hire, and it's like, well, have you done anything to make them feel welcome? Have you done, it's these cultures and these company cultures, they don't change overnight. They don't change out of nowhere. It's like a garden. If you don't plant it, you don't, figure out where you want things placed and change the irrigation levels and fertilize the ground, you don't just get a lovely rose garden out of nothing, right? So
Right.
You're right. It's very much about looking at how you're supporting these people, how you're supporting the women that come into your organization, if they're going to end up as working parents or not, if they come from a different set of lived experiences or intersectionalities that you don't have experience with. Exactly. How are you supporting that? How are you understanding where they come from or trying to make more room for them?
Yeah, it's exactly that. And treating people as individuals also is important, really seeing them as the human that they are, and not making assumptions about what they need and what's important to them. So I think there's a lot of growth to be made there, but I'm really encouraged and excited by the number of women in STEM careers. And I think organizations like Black Girls Code, they do a phenomenal job of getting more of them in place and having them be very excited about the work. So that's what excites me. I think there's a lot of cool stuff out there from a lot of young professionals that I enjoy following.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for calling out that organization. I've taken a look at them. They look wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see where that goes. So do you see this growth continuing in the future? Do you see, personally, I find it interesting to see what visibility does. Seeing somebody up, higher up in the ranks that looks like you or that has followed the same path as you, but that's not the whole picture, right? That's not the only thing that can happen.
Yeah. I definitely think it'll change. I think people, we have access to a lot more information. Everyone's on the internet now, and so that's done and over with. So we all have access to sometimes too much information, but people have some exposure. I think globally the picture can look a little different depending on where in the globe you're focusing on. But at least here in the United States, I see a pattern of more people in STEM. I see a pattern of people people feeling free to create their own ventures if they're interested in doing that. I see a lot of organizations supporting them in that. So I do see some growth there. I think ongoing and continued support is the thing that I'd like to see more focus on. And also I'd love to see people really focusing on the so what of the equation. Like, every time a company is trying to increase a number somewhere, I'm like, and why? And so what? And if you can't answer that question, then that tells me a lot about your intention. So I'd like to see the so what answered more often, like what is the world you're trying to create, who's solving problems, and I'd love to see a rainbow of people out here leading the solutions. And I don't see as much of that as I want to see in tech, but I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing so far.
Yeah, there's always room for that improvement. And until we, take care of both visible diversity as well as non-visible diversity and really have that true representation, that's when you get to the point of having great products, great services, things that really help all people and not just a certain segment of them.
Absolutely.
All right, so we only have about a minute left. As a kind of doorknob question before we end here, you are a mother, an entrepreneur, and an innovator. And like you said, we all have the same 24 hours in a day, but not everybody uses them the same. So do you use this kind of time intelligence in your day-to-day activities? And if you do, which I kind of suspect, what tips could you give our audience on how to treat time as that resource that it is?
Yeah, I think it's cliche, but time is the biggest asset that we all have, and so not wasting is important. And what I do is I block time for what's important. I use time blocking as a strategy, and so the first step is knowing what's important. And I think that you have to know what's important to you. If you don't define it, then what's important will become what it's important to everyone else. So you have to define what's important to you and make time for it. And whether that's, it could be family, it could be hobbies, it can be certain things at work. If you don't make time for it, you can't do anything. So I use time intelligence there, but also I look at patterns. I think aligning your day with with what you want to see in your world is important. But again, you have to define how you want to live in the world and what you like to see day to day. And then every day you want to align your time with that. Again, if you don't, someone else is going to drive. So the best thing I can say is you should drive your day. I do realize that not everyone feels that they're in control of their day. There are a lot of people that people have to answer to every day. And so the trick to that is really carving out the time that you have to be on someone else's clock. You have to make that meaningful to you. And then outside of that time, you have to protect the time that is yours. And that's the best thing that I can say. For example, at my company, we work really hard, but people we don't bother people on vacation as a rule. We don't contact them when they're on vacation. And so things like that are important. If you're going to take time off and work with people that honor your time away. And I could keep going, but there are tons of rules. But yes, it is very important.
I love that. Thank you so much. We are at time, but if you have any links or any information that you'd like to share, ways people can contact you, please put that in the Zoom chat, and I'd be happy to share that with our attendees on the website. Thank you, Kishau. That was absolutely wonderful. Round of applause for you.
Thank you.